Yeah, well, I get this call in October of '98 from this gentleman who identifies himself as Wilbur Tennant. He's raising cows on this property out in Parkersburg. And what he's telling me is he is watching white foaming water coming out of a landfill owned by the DuPont company. And the cattle are drinking this white foaming water. They are developing tumors. Their teeth are turning black. They're dropping dead. They're wasting away other animals in the area. Deer, fish, birds also are getting sick and dying. And he himself believes he's got health issues related to being exposed to this water and the vapors coming off the landfill. He's having difficulty breathing. He's coughing. His family, he's concerned about them as well. He has no idea what is in this water other than he can see, white foam. He can see what's happening to the animals. He's been videotaping it because the state and federal regulators really aren't helping him out. The company isn't really helping him. People in town don't really want to talk to him because this is such a huge employer in the area. So he has no idea, what this chemical, this material in this white foam is when he reaches out to us. And since, this is the kind of work I had been doing for our corporate clients, our chemical company clients, helping them get permits for landfills, helping them figure out, what are the laws and regulations that govern how you operate a landfill. I thought this might be something we could help Mr. Tennant on. I could pull the permits for this landfill. I could figure out what kind of chemicals are allowed to be there. What are their permit limits? Is something being emitted above the permit? Yet when we took that case on, it ended up being a lot more complicated, because what we found out was the chemicals that were causing this foam that were leaking out of this landfill were completely unregulated. They were chemicals that had come out right after World War II, decades before the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency even came into existence. That the EPA wasn't even formed until 1970. And some of the first federal laws regulating new chemicals coming out in the environment didn't come out until 1976. And they focused primarily on new chemicals coming out after 76. So, what we discovered was we were dealing with contamination that was being caused by a chemical that was essentially completely unregulated. And not only did the regulators not know, really anything about this chemical, the public also didn't know anything about it. Nobody knew what this stuff was or what its impacts would be to the people who were being exposed to it.
Yeah, I years ago I had a guest on. He was actually also a attorney, Alan Bell. He actually wrote a book called Poison, How a Crime-Busting Prosecutor Turned His Medical Mystery into a Crusade for Environmental Victims. It's a little bit of a long title, but it's he had an interesting kind of medical mystery too, and had all these health issues, couldn't figure out what was going on. They had to completely remove him from any civilization, and they put him basically in a bubble in the woods, and come to find out it was his a reaction he was getting to all these chemicals in this new office building. And so there's just so many cases that you hear about where there's these mysteries, these medical mysteries, where people just are sick, or they don't feel good, or they have some unusual symptoms. And one thing we never think about, we always think about diet and health. I talk a lot about diet and health on the podcast, but one thing we kind of neglect sometimes is just the chemicals that are in our drinking water, the chemicals that are in the clothes we wear, in the furniture, in the paint. If you live in an older house, who knows what type of chemicals you might have that were unregulated at the time. I think that's something that kind of gets overlooked at times. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people, particularly in the United States, just assume, when they turn that kitchen faucet on, that the water is perfectly safe, that somebody has been doing whatever needs to be done to check it out and make sure that there are no harmful chemicals. After all, this is the United States. This is the year 2020. And I think what is particularly disturbing is when people realize how little has actually been done in that regard. There are relatively few chemicals that are actually regulated in our country. And you've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of chemicals that are out there that either came out before a lot of these regulations were put into place or simply haven't been adequately tested or studied to have any sort of health standards or guidelines out there. So, to hear that your water meets all state and federal standards and guidelines, I think most people assume that means you've looked for everything and everything is fine and your water is perfectly fine. Not necessarily. What that means is only the relatively few compounds have been tested for, and maybe your water is okay as far as those couple of compounds are concerned. But unfortunately, there's this larger universe of unregulated materials. And what you see in the film Dark Waters, and what I tried to explore in more detail in my book, Exposure, with this one chemical, PFOA, and this related family of chemicals that we now call PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkylated substances, which is a real mouthful. But it's this whole family of completely man-made materials with carbon and fluorine combined that PFOA is a part of. Most of these chemicals have been out there for decades. We've all been exposed to them. We're finding them in drinking water all over the United States, all over the planet. They're showing up in the blood of virtually every living thing on the planet. Babies are being born with these chemicals in our blood. And we're being told, well, we simply don't have enough science and studies yet to tell us exactly what they're going to do to us. I mean, that's kind of a scary concept, to know that these exposures have been going on for decades, all across our country, all across the world. Virtually every living thing on the planet is contaminated. Yet we're being told by the companies that make these chemicals and have been pumping them out there for decades, well, you can't prove, the people who are exposed, you can't prove what harm they're causing you yet, so we're going to just keep on pumping them out. That's really sort of I think a mind-blowing concept when people realize what really happens with the way chemicals are regulated here in the United States.